chair.
Yes, it's good to have a comfortable chair.
No, well, of course, it's a recliner, is it?
And yes,
So I
yes.
sit here with
and you can put your feet up. Lovely. Has that started?
Yeah,
Right.
that's all going.
Lovely.
Right, okay, let's start then.
Right,
Okay, so where were you born?
I was born in Newbridge in South Wales, which was in those days was no man's land. It was neither Welsh nor English.
Oh, really?
My mother used to say that we were, I can't remember what the word was, but there was a word anyway, we didn't belong. But of course now it's called Gwent, and it's in Wales. So that's where I was born.
Okay.
And then I stayed there till I was 5.
So, first of all, what did your father do?
My father was a miner.
There's his
As
coal?
well. Yes, as were his father and my other grandfather, all miners, going way back, you know.
Okay.
That's all they knew. But of course my father was in the First World War. And that didn't do him much good. He was deaf when he came home because of the blast, I suppose, I don't know. And then we lived there until I was 5, and then of course the coal pit in the 1930s, the pits were having trouble with the owners and one thing and another, and so he decided to up sticks and come to Kent. But because he was deaf in one ear, that was a bit of a problem. But anyway, he did manage, you know, people, his mates, as he said, used to help him. And I mean, when you're underground, I suppose the noises are pretty loud anyway. Yes. You wouldn't, you know, it didn't bother him. Then we stayed there until the war started, you see. And then the war came along, and my mother hated Hitler because she just started her little bed and breakfast business. For about 2 years she'd been doing it. She was just getting going.
And
where
where
Hitler
was
came
that?
along. In Deal.
In Deal.
Deal. Okay. And she loved living in Deal. Well, I did too. I mean, it's a lovely place. It still is, actually. And
so whereabouts in Deal were you living?
Shall I tell you? At least 10 different dates, different places.
Oh, really?
Because my mother was, the grass on the other side was always greener. And first of all, you know, we lived in lodgings, I suppose, at first. And then we got a pit house, because there's a place called Davis Avenue, it was called, Mill Hill in Deal. It was built by the pits, and it was all pit houses. And we lived there. But then my mother didn't like living with all the other miners. See? I was an only child. So we had to move down to the town. And my father used to I think he never knew where he was going to go home tonight, you know, because she was always moving. About 10 times in as many years. She was never happy. Until, as I say, we got this lovely house in Gladstone Road. And she was so, you know, she was so keen on it, and then Hitler came and spoiled the whole damn thing. And it wasn't very good. Right opposite the barracks in Deal, because of course we had Marine barracks there. Yes. They've gone now, in all houses. And so then I was evacuated. Well, then when I left school, when I was 16, I couldn't go back to Deal because it was a registered area or something, a restricted area. So I had to go and live in Wellingarn City with my aunt, and I lived there for a couple of years, and then my father decided that perhaps it was time he moved, because of course things weren't too happy and weren't too good down in Deal because of the there weren't bombs, but it was the shelling, you see, because of course it's not far from Dover, and so the shelling, and it was shell warning was on all the time. And so he decided that he'd better move. So they came to live up in Welling Garden. And lived in oh dear, it was a terrible place. It had been, I forget what they call it now, it had been, well, it was almost falling down. It was a little cottage right on the edge of the town. And it had been, I think it had been empty for I don't know how many years, and my uncle, who was pretty handy with his, he could do most things. He said, well, I'll do it up for you to come and live there. And we didn't have a tap, we had a tap outside for 3 cottages. And we had a what's the name, loo, I forget what they call those now. And, well, we lived there, I think for, I suppose maybe 4 years. And then I was working, I was a short-time typist, of course. I went to Folkestone, what was that called? I can't remember what that was called.
Secretarial College or something?
Secretarial College. We did shorthand and typing every day, and bookkeeping and things like that. But we also did all the other subjects, French, which I was never any good at. But anyway, that was. So of course I was evacuated to Wales, which was well, it was fun because it was near my grandmother, and then in the following September, then I left school, and so then I went to live with my aunt, and I got a job with Norton Grinding Wheel Company, which was a big American firm, and I started in the typing pool, and I worked there for 5 years, I think. In the end, I was the assistant welfare officer. I went to a course in London for the I forget what it's called now, some department, and we had a lot of young girls coming over because, of course, the men were gone to the war, and so we had a lot of young girls coming from Ireland, and we had an awful lot that came from Norfolk and around that way. I don't know why they came from Norfolk, and so my job was really to meet them at Watford Station and sort of find digs for them, and they were a bit of a handful, I'm telling you. But I stayed there until, I suppose, 5 years or so. And then when the war finished, you see, I was thinking of going back to Deal, but then there wasn't anything there for me. I went back to Deal, there was nothing there for me, really. So I went to work for Wellingarn City Limited. I was secretary to the company secretary there. And have you been to Wellingarn City? No. Well, Wellingarn City was a bit, was started by Ebenezer Howard, and I can't remember the name of the other fellow. And Wellingarn City Limited owned everything. They owned the building company and the laundry and the stores and everything was Wellingarn City Limited. And it was, well, it's a nice place. It still is a nice place. And I worked with them for 5 years, I suppose, again. And then, of course, I met Gwyn. Now, Gwyn was Welsh, but of course he was working, at that time he was working in Potter's Barn. And I'd known him for many years because his family lived next door to my aunt and uncle in Sandwich, in Kent. You see, they were Welsh as well, obviously. With a name like Gwyn, what would you expect? And so we decided to get married, but then where we were going to live, because he was working in London. He was stationed in Pottersbar, but he was working in London because he worked for the GRA, Greyhound Racing Association. Because he worked there before the war, you see, so of course he went back to his job. But he couldn't find anywhere to live in London, of course. I mean, it was terrible in London. So
why was it terrible in London?
well, because after the war, because everything had been bombed, and he couldn't find anywhere to live. It was terrible. And anyway, we got married, and then we lived at home for I suppose about 6 months, and he was going up and down on the train. And some nights after racing, he used to forget to get off, and he'd go to sleep and forget to get off at Wellingarn City, and he'd end up in, I forget where, Luton I think it was, or something like that. And we went to live in Abbey Wood, actually, which is just down the road here. And we had a flat there, And we lived there for, well, Barry was born there actually. We lived there for about 5 years, and then we moved to Perryvale.
Whereabouts in Abbeywood were you?
Abbeywood in McLeod Road.
Cloud Road.
McLeod Road, just the main road going up from the station, where the trams used to go up and down. And people used to come and stay, you know, and they'd say, "What's that noise?" And we'd say, "Oh, was it a tram?" Because you were so used to them, you
Yes.
didn't even notice them, you know. And so we stayed there for about 4 or 5 years, and then we went to live in Perryvale, because Gwyn was transferred to White City, which was easier from Perryvale. And then, of course, from there, we went up to Birmingham. We were only in Birmingham 2 years, thank God.
And why did you go to Birmingham?
Because he was transferred. He was.
Okay.
He was. What's the word?
Well, the Greyhound manager.
Yes, he was
Promoted?
promoted. That's
Ah.
the word, promoted.
Okay, so
Yes,
whereabouts
yeah.
in Birmingham were
In
you?
Birmingham, in Hall Green, which was the stadium was in Hall Green, and we lived in Hall Green. So he used to come home every day for lunch, which was nice. And then we were only there for 2 years, and then he got transferred to Manchester. So that was it. You know, we were in Manchester then, and he worked at Bellevue to begin with, and then he was promoted to be racing manager at White City Stadium in Manchester, which is no longer there. It's gone. It's houses now. And of course, he was there when he died. But anyway, going back to when I was a child, although we lived in Deal, every Christmas and every school holiday I used to spend in Wales with my grandparents. My uncle had a farm which was just up the hill, and I used to spend all my time there with my cousins, because I had loads of cousins. And so I prefer country life to town life. You know, it's funny, isn't it? I could never live in London, not in London proper. That would drive me potty. Have we done enough?